Hello, I'm here to tell you about my brand new podcast for kids and families about food. And it's called Food, Glorious Food. Get ready to dive into the world of food. From the fascinating way that fruit and veg grows to the exciting magic of cooking. You'll get to learn about the history of things like pizza and how a queen called Margarita had quite an impact on what we know today. Plus, there's so much more to discover. Search Food, Glorious Food with Darren Rees wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome to the Football for Kids podcast with me, Darren Rees. In this episode, we're going to be speaking about a Scottish footballing legend and a Liverpool legend. Of course, we're going to be talking about Sir Kenny Dalglish. Kenny is one of the greatest players to have ever come out of Europe, and he was also a great manager too. He won multiple titles with Celtic and Liverpool. He was a Ballon d'Or runner-up and had managerial success with the likes of Liverpool, Blackburn Rovers, Newcastle and Celtic. This is part one on the story of the great Sir King Kenny Dalglish. Before we get into this episode properly, a couple of your shout-outs and your messages which have come in via Apple Podcast reviews. Thank you so much to everybody who's hit the follow or the subscribe button. If you haven't done it, then please do it right now. And also a huge thank you to everybody who's taken the time to give the podcast 5 stars no matter where you're listening to it and to write a review. The first one is 5 stars and says, "Love your show." Hi Darren, I'm Ava and I love your show. I play for an under-10s team and I love to listen to you on the way to my matches. And I would love it if you could give a shout out to all of my friends and my coaches at my football club, North East Leeds Lionesses. And I think they are all amazing. Thanks and bye. And that is from Ava, who's age 10 and plays as a striker and as a winger as well. Well, Ava, a massive shout out to you and everybody, including your coaches and all the other parents and everybody involved in your football team at North East Leeds Lionesses. The next one says, "Excellent podcast, 5 stars. My 7-year-old son and I found your podcast around 6 months ago and we listen to it most evenings on repeat. He always looks forward to them, especially he loves the kids versus adults and any on Chelsea. Even though we can't become patrons, we love your podcast and hope there are many more to come." Well, to the person who wrote that review and gave it 5 stars, thank you so very much for taking the time to do that. I'm really glad that the podcast is going down well in your house, and don't you worry, Kids vs Adults Series 2 is on its way. In fact, I'm recording the first 4 to 5 Kids vs Adults next week, so you'll start to get Kids vs Adults episodes every single week for about 7 or 8 weeks from next week. Right, well that's all we've got time for in terms of shout-outs and messages and reviews and all that other good stuff. If you want to get involved, then send a request in, get a shout in for your teammates or your coaches or whatever it is. Then please either write an Apple Podcast review, get on Audible and write a review, or you can ask an adult to send an email to footballforkidspodcast@gmail.com. Right then, it's time to get into the story of the absolutely brilliant Sir King Kenny Dalglish. Kenny Dalglish was born on the 4th of March all the way back in 1951 in Glasgow, Scotland. Kenny grew up being a Rangers supporter, and when he was a youngster, he and his family moved to a flat which was just a stone's throw away from the Ibrox. That is Rangers football ground, in case you didn't know. The flat which they lived in looked over the training ground for the Rangers first team. Kenny couldn't believe his luck. He would watch them set up and train, and it was absolutely fascinating. Kenny was brought up by good parents who had good values and morals. His dad was keen on football, pretty much like everyone living in that area. Before Kenny could even stand up, his dad would hold him up by his two hands and get him to kick a ball. Kenny was playing football before he could pretty much do anything else. When Kenny was around 5 years old, he really started to love football, and one of the local dads made some football goals out of some metal and got some nets. Kenny and his mates were playing with them at every single opportunity which presented itself. From the light in the morning until the dark in the evening, they would be playing football. Kenny attended a school in the Milton area of Glasgow, and he actually started his footballing days off in a team as a goalkeeper, where he and his teammates won lots of local competitions. Kenny was standing out as a goalkeeper, but also he could play out on field as well. Now, remember when Kenny was younger, he was a Rangers fan. His dad was a Rangers fan, and he lived a stone's throw away from the Rangers ground. And then, a man from Celtic came knocking on the door. Not literally, he planned to visit. He wanted to sign Kenny up. When the man from Celtic was on his way to visit Kenny and his mum and dad at their flat next to Rangers, his dad had pictures of Rangers legends all over the walls, and his mum wanted him to take them down before the man from Celtic got there. His dad was having none of it. He said, "We'll keep them up there, we're Rangers fans through and through." And that is exactly what they did. Regardless of the pictures, Kenny was still signed to Celtic. He was now a young lad playing for a big club in Glasgow, and he said that there wasn't really a better place to be as a young player in Scotland at this time, as they had the staff in place, the training academies, and everything that you could possibly need to become a great young player. Kenny was super keen to play for the Celtic first team, but he was loaned out for a season when he started, and he had to play for the reserves for a bit as well. And then he finally came on as a Celtic first team player, where he would have a lot of fun running past defenders and sending keepers flying whilst the ball smashed the back of the net. One of his first goals for the men's senior team came in a 2-0 win against the bitter rivals Rangers. That goal must have been a weird one to score. Can you imagine being a Rangers obsessed fan? Your dad is a Rangers obsessed fan. There are pictures of everything to do with Rangers in the flat which you live in. You live right next to Rangers, and then in a Celtic shirt you score against your team. That must have been a tough one to take. Kenny ended up spending 9 seasons as a Celtic player and played hundreds of games and scored plenty of goals. Kenny is and always has been a man who's been known for saying something and then doing it. When he's made his mind up, he's made his mind up, and there is no changing it, no matter who you are, where you're from, or what you've got to offer. If Kenny has said something, then he is known for seeing it through. We'll discover more of this as we go through this episode and the part 2. Bob Paisley is somebody you've probably heard of on one of my other Football for Kids episodes. He was one of the most successful managers of all time, and one of Liverpool's most significant figures of all time. And he wanted to sign Kenny, and Kenny was ready and had made his mind up that it was time for a move. Paisley's Liverpool Football Club brought the Scottish superstar Kenny Dalglish for approximately £440,000. In today's money, that's somewhere around £2.5 million, and back in the 70s, that was an unbelievable amount of money to spend on a footballer. In fact, it was literally unheard of. Liverpool were happy to pay the fee because they knew what they were getting, an absolute superstar of a kid, and they knew exactly what he could do with a football. When Kenny joined Liverpool, the club were in a good place. They had won the English top division 2 seasons previous. They had fairly recently lifted the FA Cup, and they were the current European champions. Kenny was joining a team where everyone had a winning mentality and the attitude for earning trophies. He hit the ground running. He was scoring in almost every game. But he wasn't just scoring in almost every game. He was lobbing the keeper, he was hitting the ball from the tightest of angles into the top corner, sending the goalie flying, and he was running past 5, 6, 7, sometimes 8 players, and then slotting the ball so casually past the keeper. He truly was magnificent. George Best, who we've covered on the podcast and a proper footballing legend, said that if he was a manager, he would have picked Kenny for every single game. He said, "The man's a genius. He's thinking 3 or 4 steps ahead of everyone else. The man is simply a genius." Kenny was one of those players for Liverpool who could find something from somewhere when the team and the fans needed it most. Early into his playing career at Liverpool, Liverpool made it to the European Cup final against Bruges. This is what we know today as the Champions League. The game was a tight one and both were playing extremely defensive football. Bruges were like an army of defenders, but Kenny, with his footballing brain, had other plans. He put on a display combining his slick skills and trickery together and then put the ball past the keeper from the tightest of angles inside the box when nobody thought that they would score. Liverpool went on to win the European Championship that year, and it was thanks to that goal from the great Kenny Dalglish. In Kenny's second and third season with the club, he and his teammates went on to win the English top division, and he won individual awards for the likes of Player of the Year, Writers' Player of the Year, Club Player of the Year, and everything else you could possibly imagine. Dalglish hadn't been with the club for that long, and he was cementing his name in the history books and filling up his trophy cabinets. In the late 70s and in the early 80s, Liverpool was a tough place to live. There was less money and less work at points, and this meant that a lot of people were down and quite miserable. Football was their beacon of light, and Saturdays was the day which they looked forward to. Tens of thousands of fans would walk towards the stadium on a Saturday afternoon, and the smiles on their faces got bigger, the noise and the excitement got louder, and then King Kenny and his teammates would put on a show and make the hair on the back of the fans' necks stand up, because that is how powerful football can be. What the fans saw with Kenny was a great footballer with huge amounts of ability and a genius with a ball at his feet. But what Kenny's teammates saw was something extra, in particular when he was away from the pitch. Kenny was known for being a joker and a gentleman. He was someone who made sure that everyone stuck together, and he made everyone feel warm and welcome, normally with his humour. You either got him or you didn't. You might have heard of a player called Ian Rush. Ian went on to be one of the greatest Welsh players of all time, and a proper goal-scoring machine. On his first day with Liverpool, he was incredibly nervous and full of anxiety. He went into the changing rooms and was quiet as a mouse. He didn't really know what to expect. He didn't know what to say to people. He was just very quiet. It's said that Kenny had picked up that he was nervous and he was anxious and that he was being very quiet. And Kenny, being the character that he is, cracked the joke to Ian and instantly made sure that he was part of a team. It took Ian a little while to get used to Kenny and his humour, but they eventually became great friends. I think we can all learn from this. If you have someone new coming into your class at school or someone new coming into your football team, then make them feel welcome, because the smallest of gestures can go a long way. Kenny continued with his football at Liverpool. He had times when he didn't score as many goals, and he had times when he didn't miss a game, and then he had times when he was simply phenomenal. And in May 1985, Kenny would open a new door into his footballing journey, where he would become a player-manager for Liverpool Football Club. And that is a perfect place to end episode 1. Make sure you check out part 2 to listen to the rest of Kenny Dalglish's story. And remember, if you know someone who loves football just as much as you do, then please tell them about Football for Kids. And whether you're playing football soon, watching it on the telly, or pitchside, I hope that you enjoy the game. See you next time.